HMS Effingham was born into a world where naval power defined empires. Ordered as part of the Royal Navy's ambitious post-World War I construction program, she was laid down at Portsmouth Dockyard in 1917 and launched in 1921. She was one of the Hawkins-class heavy cruisers, a design conceived during the Great War to counter long-range German commerce raiders. By the time she entered service, the war had ended, but her type was still valued as a tool for enforcing imperial commitments and patrolling the far reaches of Britain's empire. The Hawkins-class cruisers, of which Effingham was one, were built to a philosophy rooted in endurance and armament rather than speed. Their 7.5-inch guns were larger than those of most light cruisers of the time, and their hulls were long and seaworthy, intended to sustain operations across oceans. Yet as with so many warships conceived in one conflict but completed in another, by the time Effingham entered service, her design was already becoming dated. Naval treaties and advances in design left her neither a true heavy cruiser in the modern sense nor a light cruiser. Nevertheless, she found her place in the fleet and for nearly 2 decades performed the steady, unglamorous work of a cruiser in peacetime. Effingham's early years were spent largely in the familiar role of imperial policeman. She patrolled distant waters, flew the white ensign in ports where British influence was expected, and gave confidence to British merchants and settlers abroad. Cruisers like her embodied the prestige of the Royal Navy in the interwar years. Her visits to far-flung colonies were part of a naval diplomacy that spoke volumes without firing a shot. With her tall, lean profile and battery of 7.5-inch guns, she was a symbol of a global power that still clung to its maritime supremacy. In 1937, as storm clouds gathered once again over Europe, Effingham was taken in hand for a major modernization. She was rearmed and refitted, her armament replaced with 9 6-inch guns in triple turrets. This was intended to bring her in line with the contemporary needs of the fleet, making her more useful in the cruiser role than with her outdated 7.5-inch weapons. The refit was ambitious, but it was also something of a compromise. Her hull and armor could not be substantially altered, so while she received modernized firepower, she remained vulnerable compared to newer designs. Nevertheless, the modernization gave her a new lease on life and made her ready to serve in the coming conflict. When World War II broke out in September 1939, HMS Effingham was pressed immediately into action. She began her wartime career on patrol and escort duties, guarding the vital trade routes upon which Britain depended. Like so many cruisers of the time, her role was as much about presence as about combat, hunting for German raiders and U-boats, protecting convoys, and ensuring that Britain's maritime arteries remained open. The Atlantic was a vast and dangerous theatre, and while Effingham did not become famous for sinking enemy ships, her constant watch was a quiet but essential part of Britain's war effort. Her most significant operations, however, came in 1940, when the German invasion of Norway brought the Royal Navy into the fjords and treacherous waters of Scandinavia. Norway was strategically vital for its iron ore, which fueled the German war machine, and both sides knew control of the Norwegian coast would shape the war in northern Europe. The Royal Navy was dispatched to support Allied landings and to prevent German consolidation in the region. Effingham, with her refurbished guns and experienced crew, was among the ships assigned to these perilous operations. In May 1940, Effingham was tasked with transporting troops to Bodø, an important staging area in northern Norway. The voyage was fraught with danger. The waters were poorly charted, the weather treacherous, and German air and naval forces a constant threat. As she steamed through the dark northern seas, Effingham carried with her not just soldiers but the hopes of stabilizing an increasingly desperate campaign. On the night of May 17, disaster struck. Navigating through the narrow channels of the Norwegian coast, Effingham ran aground on uncharted rocks near Bodø. The impact was catastrophic. Her hull was torn open, and she was stranded, unable to move. For a warship, such a fate was almost as final as a torpedo hit. As daylight came, the threat of German air attack loomed. With no hope of saving the ship, her captain made the grim decision to abandon her. Before leaving, the crew worked to ensure she could not fall into enemy hands. Demolition charges were set, and her guns destroyed. Soon after, as the men were evacuated, Royal Navy destroyers closed in and fired torpedoes into the stricken cruiser. Flames engulfed her, and finally, HMS Effingham slipped beneath the waters of the fjord. Her war ended not in a climactic battle but in the silent embrace of the rock she had struck. The loss of Effingham was a blow, but it also reflected the hazards of the Norwegian campaign. The waters were unforgiving, the charts inadequate, and the pressure immense. Many Royal Navy ships were lost in similar circumstances during the Norwegian operations, not always to enemy fire but to the environment itself. Effingham's end was a reminder that the sea remained as formidable an enemy as any human adversary. For her crew, the loss of their ship was devastating, but their actions ensured that few lives were lost in the grounding. The men were evacuated swiftly and continued to serve elsewhere in the Navy. Ships could be replaced. Crews, with their training and spirit, were far more precious. Looking back, HMS Effingham embodied the challenges of the interwar Royal Navy. She was conceived in one war, adapted for another, and lost in the early desperate battles of a third. Her story was not one of glorious victories or dramatic duels but of service, adaptation, and sacrifice. In her nearly 2 decades afloat, she symbolized the persistence of a navy stretched across the globe, adapting to new realities even as old designs were pressed into new wars. Her wreck remained where she struck for many years, a silent memorial beneath the waves. Divers in later decades would explore her remains, finding twisted steel and scattered artifacts, all bearing witness to that fateful night in 1940. For naval historians, Effingham's story illustrates the constant tension between technological change and strategic necessity. She was built for one kind of war, refitted for another, and lost in circumstances that highlighted both the strengths and vulnerabilities of the Royal Navy during one of its most testing campaigns. The irony of Effingham's story is that despite her modernization, her fate was sealed not by superior German firepower but by the timeless dangers of navigation. Warships are built to face enemies, but the sea itself remains their greatest challenge. Effingham's career was a reminder that even the most powerful navies are at the mercy of nature as much as of their foes. Her legacy lies not in fame but in service. She was one of many cruisers that carried the burden of empire, trained generations of sailors, and stood in harm's way when war came. Though she did not achieve the renown of some of her sisters, her story is part of the greater tapestry of the Royal Navy's struggle in the first half of the 20th century. In her rise and fall, one sees the trajectory of a navy adapting to changing times and enduring losses in the pursuit of ultimate victory. As the war continued without her, newer ships, more modern and better suited to the demands of total war, took her place. Yet the men who served aboard her remembered their time on Effingham with pride. She was their ship, their home, and in her steel and guns were bound the memories of voyages across the globe, the camaraderie of sailors, and the unyielding duty of service. Today, HMS Effingham is remembered as a ship that bridged 2 eras, designed for the battles of yesterday, pressed into the struggles of today, and lost to the eternal hazards of the sea. Her story, though lacking the thunder of a great battle, remains poignant because it captures the essence of naval warfare, endurance, adaptation, and the ever-present risk that comes with a life at sea. From the gun decks to the bridge, every story we tell honors those who served. If this tale made you feel the salt and steel of history, give it a like, and if you're not yet part of our channel's convoy, subscribe and join the ranks. More powerful stories await.